Well, Cian, it's wonderful to have you here. Welcome to my home.
Thank you. It is wonderful to be here. I mean, just look at the backdrop, look at the surroundings. It's gorgeous. You've
Yeah.
built a beautiful place here, Julie.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad you could make it with practically a catastrophic disaster as well.
Well, what they say, yeah, severe winds and
Yeah.
a severe weather warning yesterday and today, though. Today looks okay. It's not too bad.
So, Kate, I would love to just that you have an incredible story of how you've built 3 businesses. So I would love to learn a bit about the origin story. So can you tell us about a moment where you realized that you were going to be an entrepreneur?
Um, I mean, it goes back quite early. I mean, when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, I was doing different things I was always trying to figure out how can I earn a little bit of extra pocket money as a child, So, I mean, when I was, I think, 10 or 11, I was kind of taking old bits of wood and drilling holes in them, sticking a candle, selling them as Christmas candles in December time. I was interested in horticulture as well. My mom was big into her gardening. And so, when I was quite young, I got some strawberry plants, which kind of stick out these propagating things, and I grew a bunch of extra strawberry plants. I sold those to my local garden centre. He was impressed with that. The chap who was running the garden centre gave me a job, so I ended up working Saturdays and summertime as a kind of a 13, 14, 15-year-old in a garden centre. So I was always looking for, and then in university, I was like brewing beer and selling it to my fellow students, and so I'd always kind of been looking for ways to make an extra pound or two, and um, so then I did engineering in college. Came out of college in the early 90s in Ireland. There were no jobs, or certainly I couldn't find a job that looked in any way interesting. So I just kind of wandered around the world for 2.5 years and moved from engineering into computers. Like a lot of what happens in life just seems to be, you know, circumstantial, or it just kind of happens. You go somewhere, you meet people, you have a conversation, and then things happen.
Yeah.
One of my roommates, when I ended up in Canada, was into computers. He was teaching in a particular place. They needed someone to help them on the front desk making coffee and introducing people, or just kind of welcoming people in the morning. I started there, and then ended up getting into computers. So that was the kind of
Amazing.
yeah.
Did your parents encourage this a desire to do more entrepreneurship and to make things?
It's interesting. So my father was the exact opposite of an entrepreneur. He worked in the same company for decades. He was in insurance and pensions. He kind of became the knowledge base of insurance and pensions, certainly where he worked and for much of Ireland. Um, but it was that he would get up at the same time every morning. He would get on the same train to go into the same office year after year after year. Um, my mother would be much more entrepreneurial by nature. When myself, my 2 sisters, when we were kind of, mostly grown up and mostly finished education, she then went back in and did a few little courses and set up her own little business as a psychotherapist and various things. So she was definitely more entrepreneurial, but that wasn't visible in my early days. But I guess she definitely encouraged, she definitely gave me the understanding or the belief that if I wanted to try and do something, go for it, you know.
That's great.
Within kind of guidelines and that they were reasonably strict parents for the time as well. Certainly amongst my friends, they were known as like the parents who would not allow us to do stuff. So, I think we had both myself, my 2 sisters, we had both a reasonable understanding of what we ought not do, but also that, oh yes, go and do it. Go out there. The world is there to be explored, and why not try? Why not try stuff?
What was the first thing that you ever created or made that made you feel really proud?
The first thing,
The first thing.
apart from my children.
Yeah.
Um,
Children too.
But curious, I mean, of all the things I've done in business and bits and pieces, and some things have worked and some haven't, and some projects have worked and some haven't within businesses that have worked or that haven't. I mean, definitely being a dad, being a parent has been by far and away the most rewarding, the most growth inducing.
Even more so than building companies.
Way more so, more so. Because I think we can build companies and we can become more egocentric and we can become more, yeah, we can become more focused on the things that maybe don't matter as much, whereas with children, certainly I had to learn how to be way less selfish and way more aware, more empathetic, more, kind of that the lovely definition of love is like, willing the good of the other as other,
Yes,
as opposed to willing the good of the other as something that will make me feel better, you know? Um,
I would
so
agree. I
yeah,
became a mother 3 years ago,
yeah,
and I would say before that, I didn't know the purpose could come from anything other than building companies.
yeah, yeah. And building companies is great. I mean,
Yes.
we used to play a lot of board games and games in general as a child. I mean, in my household, we were the only household that I knew where we didn't have a television. My mother decided, in her infinite wisdom, that when we were about 3 or 4 or 5, when I was 3 or 4 or 5, uh, that television was not a good thing to have in the house, and she got rid of it.
Yes.
And so, you know, I would go to school and people would be talking about whatever TV program what was being watched, Neighbours or whatever, yeah, in
Yeah.
later years. And I wouldn't know what was going on.
Mm.
But because we didn't have a television, we played a lot of games, you know, and games and board games and I love playing games. I'm reasonably competitive, and
Yes.
um or very competitive, depending on who you ask. And playing board games, I love. Building businesses is the best game that I've ever found because it's so complex.
Yeah.
No matter, it's the old thing is like no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. Fine. Um, but, you start a business and you've got an idea. And, my dad actually, even though he wasn't an entrepreneur, he gave this fabulous thing to me when I was younger. He said, okay, so first of all, is there a gap in the market? That's where people often start. It's like, oh, I see this thing that doesn't, or I can imagine this thing that doesn't exist would be great in that situation. So there's a gap in the market. And that may well be true, but is there a market in that gap? And I remember he said this, I mean, when I was only maybe 12, and it's, some things just stick in your
Yeah.
brain. And so now every time I'm kind of starting a new idea, a new project, a new business, it's like, okay, is there a gap in the market? Yes, that's usually pretty apparent. But then is there a gap in the market? Yes, but is there a market in the gap? Will someone or will enough people pay me enough to
Mm.
build that product or service at a profitable rate to make it worthwhile spending
So,
time on?
can you take us through just a couple of minutes of the 3 companies that you built, and now you're taking another big swing at something?
Yeah.
So, just give us like a quick overview of what the experience was with those companies.
Yeah. So there probably been so before the current few things I'm working on, there were kind of three businesses that were kind of big-ish or significant-ish, whatever, not massive, but and then a few other little ones in the middle as well. And the three were so I came back from so the first one was in the dot-com era,
Hmm.
and that was kind of a pure tech software, radically on the edge of what was possible at the time, etc. The second one was in construction. So I went from like, bits and bytes and ones and zeros to really the physical world into kind of construction and buildings and housing and all of that. And then the third one was a kind of a mix between the two in some ways of a lot of the real world. So we had a consulting business, but also a digital platform on the side. Um, so how I ended up getting into the first business, the kind of pure digital software, was that I'd spent 2.5 years wandering around the world. I worked for Microsoft for a bit, learning how Microsoft works. I worked for Vodafone, Vodac, as it was down in Australia at the time.
Mm.
I picked up a few qualifications in networking and very basic coding and stuff. I mean, I was never a good coder, and if I could never ever ever write a line of code for the rest of my life, I'd be very happy. Thankfully, AI and agentic AI and no code means that that's
Yes.
quite possible now. Um, but yeah, I came back to Ireland. Worked for a year or two. First of all, with a company that was in the mobile space, so like it was a technology company in the mobile space. I asked them, could I move from the technology side to the sales side,
Hmm.
and they said no, and I got annoyed, and I went, well, if you won't allow me to move into kind of sales and the commercial, because I saw that the people in sales and the commercial side of that business were having way more fun than anyone else.
Yeah.
They were out there, they were talking to customers, they were having great conversations, and I wanted to be part of that, because I'd kind of done technical stuff. Anyway, they said no, so I said, fine, I'm going to set up something myself where I can, and the internet was just starting. E-commerce was a thing. Some of the new coding was kicking off. So we started building this company. Got a chunk of investment in. Got some kind of private money in. Government in Ireland matched that funding, so we had a nice amount of cash to start building stuff.
And when
Built
to that company. What happened to that company?
Well, so in the dot-com crash, so it did not survive the dot-com crash.
Wow.
I've kind of shared the story with numerous people that, my wife, bless her, she got engaged to a millionaire and married a pauper because in between our kind of getting engaged and getting married, the dot-com crash happened.
Yeah.
And I, as a leader, and I know this now, I wouldn't have said this at the time, but I know now that what I did not know and the systems I did not have around me. So I didn't have enough support around me. I didn't have enough knowledge and things. I was not able to keep that business alive through the dot-com crash. Other people with similar sized businesses doing similar activities were able to keep their businesses alive.
Because of leadership.
That is now what I believe. Yes.
So in that scenario, what do you think was the hardest leadership lesson about people that you learned?
Letting people go, letting friends go. So I started that business with two friends of mine, and one of whom is now my brother-in-law, curiously.
Yeah.
But letting people go, there's like it's the embarrassment, the shame, there's the frustration. I mean, there's a whole raft of like really negative emotions that happen as you're bringing a business that had a promise, that's on a promise to people, that's taken in external funding, that has been. I mean, we were reasonably public. We were kind of touted by the Prime Minister of Ireland at the time as the future of Irish business.
Wow.
Our official launch was by the Prime Minister of Ireland saying, this is the future of Ireland, this sort of technology and these sort of people. So, it was a big launch. It was a reasonable, promise that we were on that we did not fulfill. And that was my first major failure.
So after that failure, were you afraid to start your next company, or what were you most afraid of?
I wasn't really afraid of starting another company. So, but I mean, we were a little bit in debt after that failure, and so we kind of had to work back out. I mean, the first thing was trying to get out of the almost inevitable slump of like, ugh, and that was hard, but so I moved from Ireland, where I'd been running that business, over to Scotland, where my wife Samantha was finishing her PhD, and I kind of wallowed in self-pity for a little while, but Samantha wasn't having very much of that, so kind of quickly said, look, just get out there. I was applying for other jobs, and I kind of realized, bizarrely to why I set up that business, I realized that one of the reasons that business failed was that I, as the leader, wasn't as involved in sales and at the front line with customers as I should have been. I kind of delegated that down to one of my other partners, who was kind of but he was more marketing than sales. And at the time, I didn't understand the difference between marketing and sales.
Yeah. You learn so much when you're on the front line every day having conversations with people.
In the early stages of a business, when you're looking for product market fit, nothing, in my experience, nothing can take the place of the person who's making the key decisions at that early, crazy startup stage, having as many conversations as possible with potential clients and then actual clients. Because if you, as the leader, aren't doing that, chances are you're going to miss so much, because even if it's just going through one other person's filters and that, you're not getting the first person.
Would you say that is the one piece of advice that you'd give to your younger self in that situation, or is there another piece of advice?
That is certainly one piece of advice, that as a startup entrepreneur, as a startup leader, get really close. Get as close as you can. Have as many conversations as you can with your prospective clients and then your clients, and keep checking in with them. And it's always a balance as well. You don't want to annoy your clients by asking too much. I think we've got kind of
How do you strike
survey.
that balance?
How do
you strike that balance between annoying them by checking in too regularly? Because people hate forms.
Oh, feedback forms are old. But you know what? We're now in an era where the old way of getting information by, requesting people to fill out forms, or filling out forms after you've had a conversation with people, we don't need to do that anymore. We can now have chats like this, which can be digitized, and then all of the information can just be extracted from it. So AI is phenomenal. It's one of the things that, if I imagine a world in 5 years, 10 years, one of the biggest differences from a kind of a software point of view, or from a systems point of view within businesses or whatever, will be that we won't be filling out forms anymore.
Yeah.
We won't need to, you know. So I think, what do people value and what do people like now in an era of, in an ever more digital world, the value of in-person experiences gets ever more useful, valuable, enjoyable, whatever. So one of the things I'm doing now with our business is that we're taking out our prospective clients and our clients and those who are in our community. We're creating these dinners, like, I mean, lovely dinners in lovely restaurants, kind of creating a great experience. And, we suggest that people might want to talk about AI and leadership and bits and pieces. People talk about whatever they want,
Yeah.
but they get a nice experience and they get to talk with other people, some who are there in the middle, in the thick of things, doing things right now, trying to fix and solve problems and grow businesses. And we always bring some people along as well who've been there, done that. We call them our super founders.
Yes.
And people who've got superpowers. They've figured out stuff over the years. And that in-person experience, it only lasts a few hours.
Yeah.
But the echoes of that, the value of those and what both our attendees get from that and what we get from that as kind of, people who are trying to figure out how do we help these people, how do we help with these leaders. The value is immense in the personal. So to answer your question specifically, how do you do it so you don't annoy people? Probably by figuring out how do you get in person, face to face, doing something that the other person will enjoy. It might be going out for lunch or dinner.
Yes.
It might be taking them to, it's almost going back to where.
Or taking them to Mexico City.
Taking them to Mexico City, for example,
Yes.
as you did with myself and a bunch of other people from the Elea Collective. When was that? October last year? That was fabulous.
Yeah.
That was fabulous.
I can't wait to do it again in Paris this year.
I'm looking forward to that too. Yeah.
Yes. What I've always
Yeah.
admired about you, Cian, is you bring this element of play and joy into what you're doing. So these dinners are fun for
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
And you never miss that. But yet you're also building something really big at the same time.
Hopefully.
So how do you balance living in the moment while still building for the future?
So one of the things, if I bounce to the middle business, let's say, and the middle business was in construction or property development, and we started that. We had myself and Samantha had a little house over in Ireland that we did up, and then we sold that one and bought a few flats in Scotland and started doing those up, and then various other things. And then that became a reasonable sized property business, particularly down in Spain, where we then moved. We were there for a few years. But then in the Spanish property crash, which preceded the great financial crash by about 6 to 9 months, that business, we over leveraged. In some ways, I was trying to get back to where we had been too fast. So impatience was the lesson that I learned or was forced to learn. Yes. I would say in that second one, because that was the second time that we went from zero to millions and back to zero again. But now we had 2 small children.
It's so hard.
Oh my God. And 7 figures in debt and kind of, that was more of an existential, oh my gosh, do I have what it takes? So I have learned since that, one of the fundamental questions that men in particular ask themselves is the question, do I have what it takes?
So to take me back to that moment when you were asking yourself, do I have what it takes?
Yes.
What went through your mind when you had 2 children and these 2 companies had failed? What were you experiencing in yourself at that time?
Despair was probably it was almost a complete lack of hope that it could ever be better. Now, we were absolutely blessed that, as the great financial crash was happening, that was going on, that was the backdrop to stuff happening anyway. I mean, at the time, myself and wife, we were having a pretty intense and fabulous most of the time kind of party lifestyle in Spain. People were coming over to our house. They were always on holidays, so we were on holidays too. And so, I mean, it was quite crazy, quite intense. But my general life philosophy at that time was, well, if you do everything to excess, it'll all balance itself out.
Okay.
So party to excess, drink to excess, exercise to excess, work to excess, everything to excess, and then it'll be fine.
Did that work out?
No, no. So particularly because I found reasonably early on that a way to relax, a way to enjoy, and that, various things was, well, have a drink of something anyway.
Yes.
And then that became something that then was no longer a solution, but was a problem. So anyway, so I had to kind of knock that on the head. So, I now haven't had a, drink or bits and pieces for, gosh, 17 and a half years and counting.
Really?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
amazing.
So,
Okay.
and by figuring out how to do that, we met a bunch of people down in Spain at the time.
Yes.
And one of their messages, because when I was saying it is awful, can we do expletives on this podcast?
Yeah.
It's like, it's fucked. It is never going to be not fucked. It's just so awful. I couldn't see a way out of it at the time. And there were people who had kind of been in similar situations who went, we shall see, this too shall pass.
Yes.
It will move on. It may be bad at the moment. It won't always be bad. I was so sure at the time it was always going to be as bad as it was at the worst moment.
What did you have to do, or who did you speak to, or what did you have to remember to gain your self-confidence again?
It happened over time, for sure. I think just as, we gain esteem by doing esteemable things, we gain confidence by doing things that are confidence building just little by little, we gain trust, by kind of doing trustworthy things little by little, and so it definitely wasn't a. Actually, there was a bit of a moment. So I grew up in Ireland, like, and kind of like, Catholicism was like everywhere in the stones in Ireland growing up. I utterly rejected that when I was about 15 or 16. I thought it was a load of nonsense. But curiously, so at probably my worst moment, when I hadn't slept, it felt like I hadn't slept for about 2 or 3 weeks, and it was clear that our business was crashing around us. We had these two young children. It was like, what are we going to do? And I was pretty sure that life was awful and was never going to get better. I actually just kind of flipped back to I started saying some old prayers that I remember from growing up in school and stuff like that. And after I did that,
Which one?
I
Our
slept.
Father. Or
It was the Our Father. I remember saying the Our Father prayer as I was lying in bed, awake in that house in Spain, thinking that we are hosed. We're never going to get. I mean, our children are going to be taken from us. We're awful parents. I've done it again. As I.
Was faith important to you in this time?
Oh, at the time, it wasn't important at all. I mean, I had utterly rejected it. I had decided, I had taken a logical decision that it was nonsense.
Yeah.
And that I was having nothing to do with it. I had my engineering degree. I was scientifically trained. I erroneously believed at the time that faith and science could not coexist. And I definitely believed in science. Therefore, I could not believe in faith. Yeah.
Wow. How did your relationship to faith change over time?
So, well, so starting with that kind of, long dark moment of the soul, or whatever you might call it.
Yes.
I mean, that 4 o'clock in the morning, awake, fearful, just, that sense of utter impending doom and fear, and I mean, it was awful. And then I said that prayer a few times, and then I slept, And I remember waking up kind of going, and then I kind of forgot about it, because we do. But then Samantha was reading a book at the time called Finding Faith, curiously. And one of the lines in that, which I've repeated many times to many people in many situations, is that it gave this beautiful line, and I'll paraphrase it slightly wrong, but in essence, I recall it said something like, believing in God is a position of faith. That there's no absolute proof that God exists. Yeah. But not believing in God is also a position of faith, because there's no proof that God does not exist. Yeah. So both are positions of faith. It's just, which faith position are you going to choose as an individual? And then it said this lovely line. It's like, people who believe in a God live longer and are happier.
That makes sense.
It was like, so as an engineer, as an utterly utilitarian engineer by training, if I've got a choice between two things that are kind of equal choices, and one leads to longer life and more happiness, and one leads to, well, shorter life and unhappiness, well, logically, I would choose the one, that has got longer life and happiness. That was probably the kind of the creaking open of the door a tiny bit, and then over the next kind of years, I ran an ongoing experiment. I did A/B testing on a whole pile of stuff related to kind of faith or spirituality, or whatever, all that kind of gamut of stuff. The stuff that, the where theology and philosophy start answering questions, which is kind of at the end of the answers that all the scientific method gives us answers up to here. And then the answers get really interesting. It's like, what's the purpose of life? What are we doing as humans? And all that kind of stuff. And that's where theology and philosophy kind of come in. And so I started very peripherally because I was really just trying to get our family back on track again. Because that's when, around that time, I started the third business. Um, and
So you found the courage to start a third company.
yeah,
These two companies went to zero.
it wasn't even really courage. It almost felt like it was, I mean, inevitable or so. I vaguely recall we had a conversation, myself and Samantha, a conversation that went something like, so I was working for someone else at the time, which I found very difficult. I'm now reasonably sure that I'm fairly unemployable. Having kind of worked for myself for a few decades, but well, just working for someone else is safer for sure. Yeah. But we had a pile of debt, and we had experienced a lovely lifestyle, and now we were experiencing a much reduced lifestyle.
Right. I remember you telling me this crazy story about not being sure you could pay the school fees.
No, I mean, school fees were a while down the way. I mean, at the start, there were months in those early days where we didn't know how we were going to pay the rent, how we were going to put food on the table.
Wow.
I mean, there was one point where so when we moved back to the south of England, our son Flynn went into the local state school.
Yeah.
And there was a party that he was invited to, and we had a serious conversation on the fact that if Flynn went to this party, we would have to get a card and a present. And that was going to be like 10, 15 pounds or, plus or minus, not a huge amount of money at all. But we did not have that money. So we would have to go on a credit card. And what we were trying to do was reduce debt, not increase it. And so it was a balance between, do we put that money on a credit card, or and then allow Flynn to go to this party, which is important for social. You've got a 3-year-old now. You know how important it is. I mean, and birthday parties, children's birthday parties are the social things that happen in your kids' lives. So were we going to do that, or say no and have him not go to the birthday party? And that was a serious conversation. It was about a year or two later that the business started to generate enough money that we decided to put the children into private schools and pay school fees. And at the time, we had just enough for the first term.
Wow.
And no visibility on what would happen next. Yeah. So we went for it, and we put because we believe that education is very important.
Absolutely.
And so we did that, and then literally term after term for the next years, and then decade and a half or whatever. We found the means, and I constructed the business, which frustrated my business partner, and I do understand that now more than I did at the time, because I was demanding to kind of take more out of the business. He wanted to reinvest everything back into the business.
Yeah.
I needed to take more out. He was kind of going, well, you only need it because you're sending your children to those schools. And I kind of going, yes, but that's my choice. And
is that your philosophy now, to take out more than what you need from when you're building a business rather than investing it all in?
I think it's very situationally dependent, and this can often be a point of major contention between founders and co-founders.
Yeah.
Because we all individually have different desires for our life.
Yes.
We all have different abilities to be or to have high levels of kind of, self-denial, or, I now understand it, some personalities need to have fun before they do the work. Other people do the work and then have fun.
Yes.
I'm more, and my daughter as well is more on the let's have fun before we start the real work, and then let's try and have as much fun as we're doing the work as we possibly can. That's kind of our philosophy. My wife and our son are more the do the work that you need to do first, and then go out and have the fun.
So one thing I've thought about is when is the right time to start a company? And so you've done it where your children have gone through the ups and downs of 3 companies, and they've seen the highs and the lows and the despair, and then the success. Your last company was an incredible acquisition. So how do you think that shapes them in terms of their desire to go into entrepreneurship?
Well, something that I was grateful to hear. So the first business that I started and then managed to not get through the dot-com crash, they weren't even around at that one, so they had no idea of that business. The next one, they were blissfully unaware when they were younger just how financially tenuous life was. But I think this is often the case. I've heard numerous other entrepreneurs who've had young families. Is that, if you're mindful about it, you can be going through all sorts of chaos. I mean, either as a couple, because it's really hard to be a couple. It's really hard to run it's hard to run a business, and particularly with young children, it's hard. But we naturally, and I think correctly, try and kind of shield our children from that kind of from the adult stuff. Um, it was also somewhat, and we were utterly kind of blessed to have forced upon us the situation when our children were younger that we didn't have any money to go anywhere, so we couldn't like go on trips, we couldn't do any of the bringing our children to here, there, and everywhere. Life became really simple for those early years, and we had to create our own fun, almost back to kind of where I was in my childhood when we didn't have a television, so you had to make stuff up.
Could be even more magical.
Well, it was what we had was time.
Yes.
And I think that what I now kind of understand is like what children want most from their parents, particularly when they're young, is the time of their parents. And so we would go for walks, we would pick blackberries in the autumn, we would kind of make stuff, we would kind of go down to the parks and because we didn't have money to do anything else, that's what we did. And so that was quite nice. Um, as we've explained to our children in later years just how tenuous it was and some of the decisions and bits and pieces. Um, it's always nice when you have your teenage children kind of giving you that little kind of grudging, okay, that's quite nice.
So what they remember are these walks and the picnics and the time with you, but they don't remember the lack of finances at that time.
They had no awareness that we didn't have really any money in their early years because that wasn't important. We remember the first time we went to, the first time we went on holidays, which was years after I set up that third business, and eventually, I had both a little bit of spare cash and the confidence that in my absence, the business would be okay. I mean, so for the first few years, didn't take holidays, just, and it's working all the time because, it was on a knife edge all the time. Um, but that first holiday, we took a little spin down. We got a little kind of apartment down in Spain somewhere, and it had some slides, and it was outside, and it was hot, and the children thought it was fantastic. It was a dive. It was awful. It was all we could afford. But like in comparison to some of the places where we both lived and holidayed in previous years, myself and Samantha were going, but the children loved it because they don't know. They don't know any better.
Amazing.
So that was nice. And then to the entrepreneurship, so a couple of months ago, my son rang me up and he said, "Dad, this project I'm doing for my final year in engineering, I'm thinking I might try and actually make a few more of it." He does a lot of surfing, and his project is 3D printing of surf fins, so the kind of things that go on the back of the surfboard that help you to control it. I said, "I think I might make an extra few and try and sell them. So I might set up like a little business."
So exciting.
And then he said, "Would you mind if I kind of ring you up every now and again and ask you some questions on like, marketing and stuff like that?" And my heart just went, because it's like, would I mind if you ring me and ask this? I would like nothing more.
Yes, ring me every day.
Oh, absolutely, but I know my son won't because he likes to figure stuff out on his own and all of that, which is great. It is great. But that's wonderful. I love seeing that.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think what I love hearing the most is just how much meaning children have given you alongside business, if not more.
More in the meaning, yeah. I mean, business has really helped me to understand how teams of people working well together can create change, can create products and services that then create change. I was really lucky to have in my previous business. So my business partner stepped back a few years before we exited, and I looked at that and I went, "Oh, okay, that looks good." I took a 2 to 3 month sabbatical then just to see how much of the business would survive without me there. And I came back in after sabbatical, and it was doing better in all sorts of ways. So it was like fantastic. At that stage, the business was maybe about 80 people strong. I love the startup side and the early stage of the scale up, the middle part of the scale up. I'm not such a fan of, that kind of having to put in processes and all that kind of stuff. But then so we found this amazing gentleman, Jonathan Sykes,
Yes.
who came in as our chairman, became exec chairman, became CEO. By the time Accenture came knocking on the door saying we'd like to buy you, Jonathan was in post as CEO. I had just step back from active day-to-day management and involvement in the business,
Perfect timing.
which was superb from a timing point of view. It meant that when the actual sale happened, myself and Richard weren't required. We were obviously clearly not necessary for the onward running of the business, so we weren't required to be part of the onward running of the business. But what I learned from Jonathan in particular was how to get teams to work well together and how to give autonomy and accountability to a group of people to go off and research a problem, come up with a possible solution, check in with the leadership as to is that solution acceptable to the leader, and then go do it. We would give them the resources and the ability to go do it. And most of the time it worked. Some of the time it didn't, of course, because nothing ever works 100% of the time. But the kind of the openness, the transparency, the trust, trust down to a team that he did. I found it difficult in these. So I'm running a couple of businesses now. I'm really trying to, as early as possible, give autonomy and trust and accountability down to the teams, because I have seen firsthand how that allows us to grow.
And you have more freedom.
Oh, and then I have more freedom, and so I can be here. I can be here in Portugal.
Yes.
There's great stuff going on back in the UK in various places where our people are, and I don't have to be part of that on a daily basis. Thanks, actually, partially due to some of the technology that we're building, I can check in and know what's going on without having to be phoning up and the way I used to in the past. Which is great, because I am a control freak. I am competitive. I am a control freak. I used to jokingly, but not really jokingly, say that everything that I let go of in my previous business had my claw marks on it, because I'd let go.
So last fun question.
Go on.
When was it Accenture that came knocking?
Yes.
What was your first splurge, or how did you celebrate the moment?
It's a bit of a silly one, but a few months as we were going through the process, it took quite a while. It was just over 9 months of a due diligence process, and if impatience was the reason that the middle business failed, and patience was a virtue or whatever that I had to learn, the patience required, and I've had this conversation with loads of people who've gone through the sale of a business, the patience that you have to learn going through the due diligence when there's a proper serious buyer buying a proper serious business. It was difficult but great, and you have to both, you're holding on to the hope that it might happen, because it'll be a lovely outcome if it does happen, while also understanding that there are 1,000 reasons why it might not.
What was your most fun splurge?
Oh, sorry, the fun. So as we were going through that process towards the end, and we were deliberately, myself and Samantha, we were deliberately not looking at things that we might do or might buy, because then we didn't want to be disappointed. Yeah. But one of the things I saw was a massage chair.
Oh, okay.
In a little shop in Guildford, and it was about £3,000. And I said to Samantha, it's like, if this deal happens, then I'm going to buy that chair. and so it happened. The money came in, and I bought that chair. Very soon after, and that chair is fabulous, and I still love it. And even just a couple of nights ago, I was just sitting back down and just getting this lovely back massage. It's great. We also did move house to a fabulous, open, bright.
Beautiful, your house.
Yeah. So, we had a lovely home that we had managed to buy along the way. Having rented for many years, that was also part of the challenge. And we had to rent, and we were kind of moved on, more than we wanted. But yeah, being able to, that was the biggest splurge. So the house was the biggest splurge, but the massage chair was the first kind of utterly frivolous, thing that I bought ever.
So very last question.
Okay.
Fast forward to your life in 30 years' time.
Yeah.
What do you hope the legacy of your life's work to be? Not just work, but who you are as someone who's been in this world.
Yeah. So I would love it to be true. So fast forward 30 years, I would love to be true that stuff that we're building now, it's kind of the combination of tech and humanity and finance and funding and all of that, that has helped. If we could shift the dial from the kind of 8 out of 10 businesses at the moment that are funded fail to like 7 out of 10, to 6 out of 10, to 5 out of 10, by helping those leaders who could actually make their businesses better, as opposed to those businesses fail, that would be amazing, because then just imagine all of those businesses, all the staff in the businesses, all the clients of the business, all the technology and products in those businesses. I think that would have a reasonable shift of the dial for kind of human flourishing globally. You know,
I love
I
that.
think so.
Well, I hope to be on that journey with you as you build that. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Julie.